Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Maximizing Economies of Scale in Healthcare. I am Mackenzie Bean with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Brad Wilson is a Vice President at OptiFreight Logistics. Brad has 30 years of experience in healthcare distribution, manufacturing, and supply chain sales leadership. Much of this experience has been in the medical, ambulatory, laboratory, and pharmacy care arenas, working with clinical, operational, logistical, and sales teams that support a wide spectrum of innovative supply chain activities. Specifically, Mr. Wilson spent 10 years leading cross-functional teams both regionally and nationally in the perioperative and procedural supply chain areas. Strategic planning, team development, and solution innovation are core focuses of his. For the past 6 years, Mr. Wilson has led the commercial team for OptiFreight Logistics, including corporate and strategic accounts, strategic services, sales, and account management in both the medical acute and several non-acute markets. India Bellard is the Supply Chain Client Services Manager at Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System. India joined the Materials Management Division of Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System in 2012. She began as a procurement specialist on the purchasing team, supporting many different departments, and currently serves as a Supply Chain Client Services Manager, overseeing the Freight and Transportation Management Program. In April of 2015, Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System in Baton Rouge opened Logistics One, a supply chain distribution center to provide more efficient materials management and delivery. Currently, India supports the transportation and logistics management team at Logistics One to optimize the company-owned transportation and delivery network fleet of vehicles. India is a native of Irvine, California, and moved to Louisiana in 2003, where she earned a Bachelor of Science in Finance from Xavier University of Louisiana and a Master's of Business Administration in International Business. Brad, I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to discuss this critical topic. As I'm sure many of you know from firsthand experience, mergers and acquisitions are dominating healthcare today. Here's a couple of stats from calendar 2018. If you look at the first half of the calendar year and compare it to the previous 6 months in 2017, mergers and acquisitions of healthcare providers more than doubled. Almost $315 billion worth of value was involved in an M&A in the first half of 18. And in the second quarter of 18 alone, there were 255 healthcare provider deals that were involved in merger and acquisition. So it's absolutely a critical topic right now. And so the aim and goal of these mergers and acquisitions is often to decrease cost, standardize care, improve quality. The mass consolidation, however, creates some new issues, which are growing complexity, duplication of efforts, and ultimately higher costs if not managed. So to address this trend, health systems today are beginning to centralize lots of functions. Centralized purchasing is a very common one. Today, we're going to talk about a major but often overlooked area, an opportunity to centralize and spend and save money in the arena of freight management. So during this webinar, we're going to talk about, and you'll learn more about, 3 distinct areas: how to maximize the often overlooked savings opportunities related to freight, identify and address transportation inefficiencies, and also optimize and optimize use and time of resources, which is, our most precious commodity of all. So later on, I'm going to share how 2 major health systems are benefiting from centralized freight management today. But first, I'd like to share how OptiFreight Logistics, a Cardinal Health company, is uniquely qualified to help you take advantage of these opportunities today. OptiFreight Logistics delivers complete logistics solutions to control and reduce costs across inbound, outbound, large freight, same-day shipments, and more. And I'll spend some time as we go through the webinar, just for those of you that may not be as familiar, describing what each of those terms mean and how they relate to the overall transportation costs. So we have the largest, most experienced team in the industry. We manage more than 7,000 suppliers and well over 19 million shipments and transactions each year. We generally save our customers greater than $420 million a year in shipping expense, and we have greater than a 90% customer satisfaction rating. I mentioned a minute ago how industry consolidation is creating new complexity that can lead to inefficiency and higher costs. So let's take a closer look and peel the onion back on that challenge. So as I mentioned, healthcare mergers and acquisitions are occurring at record speed. These are resulting in some of the largest health systems to ever exist in U.S. history. While standalone hospitals were once the standard, today 75% belong to an integrated delivery network, or IDN. And the top 10 IDNs in the nation own almost 1,300 hospitals. So what's behind this drive for consolidation? As I mentioned a minute ago, the primary goals are to decrease cost, standardize patient care, and improve overall quality. But also a significant consequence of these larger health systems is growing complexity. And there's a wide variety of individual sites of care, both acute and non-acute, come under management under a single IDN umbrella. So again, let's dig deeper into this trend and its ultimate impact. So in addition to hospital consolidation, there's also a dramatic shift from inpatient to outpatient care to ultimately better control costs. Health systems now include more hospital-owned physician practices, system-managed urgent care clinics, and several other sites of care. So before joining an IDN, these individual sites purchase supplies individually, and once they become part of an IDN, these sites may continue to purchase in silos or carry forward their old practices in those silos, which can ultimately lead to higher costs and duplication of efforts. So naturally, something has to change with this picture. I mentioned before centralized purchasing. So centralized purchasing is proven to cut overhead costs almost in half and reduce total operating costs by somewhere between 5 and 10%. It's created new efficiencies, taken advantage of volume pricing, and several other economies of scale. This approach only makes sense inside the IDN enterprise. Supply chain overall represents about 30% of a hospital's operations, and those performing at the top are the ones who are able to reduce costs without sacrificing quality. So how does freight management fit into this overall paradigm? The most challenging task is scaling up transportation models that were originally designed either for a single site of care or a smaller health system. Some systems have responded by bringing in separate transportation vendors as needs arise. This is often handled by a variety of people in different departments who aren't aware of existing shipping resources and practices. And although many different departments may have different needs, there are fantastically great synergies to be gained by looking at this in a very holistic picture. So because of this overall trend, health systems many times lack control over their full transportation spend. So let's look at what the answer is to that. So just as health systems are doing with other expenses, centralizing freight management purchasing only makes sense. It's the next hidden opportunity to save. And let's look at, again, some of the variations that will drive the rationale behind this. So when you think about it, freight costs are all around us. You know, I always tell people, if you get in a car and you drive somewhere and you see a truck on the road that is backing up to a healthcare institution, it could be a small truck, a large truck, a courier, et cetera. All of those impact freight, and it sometimes is very challenging to keep them in control and in order. So, you know, here's some basic examples that many on the phone will recognize immediately inside an enterprise. Surgery centers ordering outside of the purchasing department. Suppliers making decisions to express ship orders that might not be urgent. Physician offices shipping documents. Pharmacy starting a home delivery service. So I could go on, the list is very long of these examples, but those of you that deal with it every day, you get the point, and you know as much as anybody about how this complexity can expand very rapidly. So as complexity continues to increase, hundreds, if not thousands of employees are making shipping decisions daily and often falling outside your existing freight management program, and that can ultimately cause freight costs to soar. So is it any wonder that an estimated 50 to 70% of total healthcare transportation really does go unmanaged? And overpayments on unmanaged freight can really add up. So let's take a look at a typical example for just a single 220-bed hospital. Unmanaged freight costs are bigger than you might think. So again, let's look at a specific example. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see an unmanaged package. So for that unmanaged package, the average extra cost of unnecessary shipping, handling, rush fees, other hidden costs generally add up to about $30. So on its own, $30 doesn't seem all that significant. But consider we're back at this 220-bed hospital, that on average, 220-bed hospital will do about 20,000 shipments coming in and shipments leaving the health system every year. So I noted on the last slide that 50 to 70% of total transportation spend goes unmanaged. So if we take a conservative number of just 50% of that total 20,000 shipments, so let's say 10,000 of those shipments are not managed, do the math and multiply that 10,000 times the $30. It's pretty quick to see that this hospital could be spending as much as $300,000 more than it needs to on total freight management. So if centralizing freight management is the next economy of scale, how does it work? So let's start by looking at all the ways that shipments occur today. Well, they're the cornerstone of traditional freight management programs. Inbound shipments, and I'll define that term here, inbound shipments are those shipments that are coming into your facility generally from a supplier. So supplies that you've ordered that are being shipped in, we call inbound shipments. They're really just the beginning of looking at the total freight spend. And managing the total spend is really the goal of advanced freight management today. So beyond inbound shipments, today's freight management has evolved to keep pace with and better serve the entire cost control needs of growing health systems. I mentioned before that I'll define some of the terms as we go through, and I'll take an opportunity here to walk through some of those terms as we talk through this evolution. So I mentioned on the last slide, it begins with the foundation of small parcel inbound shipments shipped to your institution by suppliers through a single nationally based carrier like FedEx, and then across multiple carriers such as UPS or DHL. Again, these are shipments coming into your facilities. Next, it then expands into large freight and managing bulk and heavy shipments. These are shipments that are typically over 150 pounds, and they typically go on larger trucks or vehicles that we all see on the road every day. So more options here yield greater efficiency and savings for freight of all types. And then we add same-day couriers, including both internal fleets, where a hospital system or IDN may own its own trucks and have its own drivers and resources. It could also use external partners. But ultimately, you move into a more full suite logistics transportation management where all spend is managed under a single umbrella. And what's the key to driving all this? It's data and analytics. That's what will enable the driving continuous improvement, high visibility, et cetera. So gaining full visibility into your comprehensive spend is really the key to start this off. So let's look at the ways that items are transported throughout your system every day. So we've talked about some of these already, but couriers running between draw sites and the lab or the reference lab. Pharmacy could be overnighting medications to patients' homes. Furniture could be delivered to a new building. Suppliers shipping products into your warehouse or other locations. These are just some samples of how items move around the health system today. It really could be a spaghetti bowl of activity, and it looks very different and challenging, and there's multiple organizations involved. And again, we've referenced before the number of people that can be involved in making decisions. You can see very quickly how some of that misalignment can add up to a real opportunity to gain greater control. So one of the questions always is, how much of this freight spend do you actually manage? And the old saying goes that you can't control what you can't see. So again, visibility is probably the starting point and the singular biggest challenge to overcome. So typically each of these shipments or movements is handled independently and captured in a variety of different systems. It's really impossible to monitor all of them. And the greater the separation between the users of the system, the greater the chance that some of those users are going to deviate from whatever standards are in place and go back to old habits, for instance. So lack of visibility to shipping practices and disparate systems across multiple sites of care keep many of these problems hidden, and ultimately excess spending adds up as a result. So once you're able to see everything that moves through your entire system in a unified view and have the audited data that ensures high level of integrity, you can make much better and more well-informed decisions to drive efficiencies and optimize your spend. So let's talk about 3 major advantages to this approach. First of all, visibility across your entire freight spend. I know I've harped on that already in this short conversation, but using comprehensive data and analytics to create insights into every way you ship. So again, these terms I've mentioned before. Inbound would be supplies coming in, generally speaking, through carriers like UPS, FedEx, and DHL. Outbound would be shipments leaving your facility, could come from a variety of users. We see many health systems that may have as many as 2,000 users making decisions on shipping products out. Again, many times those are going through the large carriers such as UPS, FedEx, DHL. Large freight, those are the very large shipments, again, many times coming in or leaving your facilities, and certainly same-day couriers. For perhaps the first time, you'll have the objective information you need to make more informed decisions, which, again, that visibility leads us to the second major advantage of centralizing freight spend and freight management, which is control over every shipment. So you can achieve this control on several different levels, but here's some examples. Putting centralized processes and systems in place to drive program compliance. Another example, using mode optimization to select the best delivery option for each shipment based on both the level of urgency and cost considerations. And finally, streamlining delivery routes to avoid the duplication of efforts and ultimately optimize the use of both time and resources. Finally, the third major advantage is just to drive new efficiency and savings. So the more deliveries you manage inside your freight management program, the more opportunities you'll create to save. So remember, one of the key things with freight management, negotiating good rates from carriers is really important, but that alone will not optimize your savings if you've got hidden gaps in your strategy to contain costs overall. Centralizing your spend can uncover these gaps. It will allow you to utilize both rates, but also the compliance and other optimization efforts in one place, and again, just inform your decisions. So what steps can you take now to centralize your freight spend? Changing your culture and centralizing your freight spend can be a really significant task, but you don't have to tackle this all at once. Think of this as a strategy, and I'm going to walk through each of the steps of this here. So once you've got total visibility into the spend, then you can begin to centralize and manage the different types of freight costs at the pace that's most comfortable and optimal for you. So here's 4 basic steps. Certainly review and assess all your freight spend. This will allow you to determine where your greatest opportunities for new efficiencies and savings are. Once you've got that visibility and assessment, evaluate the implementation requirements by opportunity. So what steps do you need to take to implement each? Sometimes laying all these out next to each other, it's easier to make decisions based on speed of implementation or speed to value. So evaluation of that implementation effort is critical. Third, align your priorities. So based on those potential savings and the effort to implement, how would you rank each of these opportunities in order of importance? And then finally, as in any good strategy and the execution of it, set the action steps and timeline on your terms. So determine how you want to proceed, keeping in mind that your system didn't get this way overnight and change doesn't happen overnight, but making changes in a planful manner absolutely can be impactful and can be lasting. So how does all this work in the real world in terms of centralized freight management? Let's see how 2 of our health systems customers are investing in change and seeing the results. One of our health systems customers had been on a competitor's freight management program before switching to OptiFreight logistics. In just the first 2 weeks of auditing same-day invoicing. So we're talking about courier invoicing. These are same-day shipments that are moving around in a local area. So in just 2 weeks of auditing that same-day shipping, we sent hundreds, literally hundreds of invoice line items back to one of the couriers involved because the charges that were showing up didn't match the master route file or the contract pricing. So this courier gave us feedback and basically said that in the multiple years that the previous freight manager had the business, they'd only heard from them twice to question any charges. So you can imagine what this particular health system savings could have been if the previous freight manager had been paying attention to those courier charges all along. Always a good rule of thumb too that a courier charge in an integrated delivery network often will be about the same amount of value as all of that parcel freight, UPS, FedEx, DHL, coming in and going out. So for every dollar you spend on parcel, you're likely spending $1 on courier. Again, results may vary, but it's a very significant element. So having advanced reporting and analytics is so critical to the success of freight management. I know I've beat that point through several of the previous slides, but to handle the growing health systems transportation needs, you've got to have the right people, the right tools to both analyze and interpret your data. And then from there, you can uncover the hidden opportunities to drive efficiencies and save money. So let's take a deeper look at more results this health system has achieved. So as I mentioned, prior to switching to OptiFreight logistics, this particular health system had little to no access to shipping data. Now they have full visibility to 100% of their managed spend. So that includes a full range of the transportation spend, including the inbound shipments, again, FedEx, UPS, DHL, inbound and outbound, as well as courier. They have this visibility in both dollars and as a percentage of total spend. The data reveals the spend for each category by carrier. So for example, revealing what the inbound mix is between FedEx and UPS, and also revealing what the average spend is by individual courier. In addition, the amount of spend that is managed is significantly higher. So compared to the performance of the previous freight management company, OptiFreight is managing already nearly 80% of the total freight spend when the previous freight manager hovered around 50% by the end of their relationship. We've also improved other key metrics as well. So for example, this particular client required transactions to be allocated to the appropriate cost centers, a very common practice in the industry. And for this health system, almost 20% of their transactions had not been properly allocated. We've reduced this to the fraction of a percent in the first several months on the program. We've also identified substantial soft savings opportunities. So those aren't rate related, but they also produce a tremendous amount of value. They can be in time and other values. So for example, we've lowered the risk by determining if shipments are properly insured or not. There's also new efficiencies that generate soft savings, such as creating shipping guides and education for new sites of care. So when a new practitioner, a new physician office, new location joins the health system, the staff there doesn't need to worry about how to ship. The guidelines are there, they can easily access them, and then they can focus on other tasks, such as improving patient care. So let's turn to our second health system example. Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System in Baton Rouge, Louisiana is the leading healthcare provider for more than half of Louisiana's population. The system includes 5 hospitals, plus a growing network of clinics, physicians, senior services, and integrated information systems. It's a prime candidate for achieving benefits made possible by centralizing transportation spend. Here to tell us more about how the health system is evaluating this opportunity is India Bellard, who is the system's supply chain client services manager. Hi, India. Thanks for joining us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brad. So working with OptiFreight Logistics, our health system has benefited from the fundamental value of freight management for several years now. I'll share some of our current results based on 12-month averages from last year to the prior year. For small parcel shipments, we've seen a 41% increase in freight savings and a 33% increase in total freight managed freight. So for large freight shipments, we've seen similar results. Our savings have increased 36% and a 40% increase in the total managed freight. We're also exploring new ways to cut unnecessary overnight shipping costs. For example, using priority overnight instead of first overnight, or ground shipping versus express saver shipping for inbound and outbound shipments. So far, we've uncovered tens of thousands of dollars in potential savings. Now we're partnering with OptiFreight Logistics to take the value of freight management to the next level and centralize our total spend. Via data analytics, we plan to increase visibility into our total transportation spend in order to accomplish 3 goals. The first goal, improve compliance. So by working to engage more suppliers and internal users to comply with our freight management program, we'll improve efficiency and generate cost savings. The second goal is to follow our transportation policies and procedures. We want to ensure we uphold the established standards and organizational expectations. So for example, we want to make sure products, equipment, and drugs are transported in the right way to promote timeliness and patient safety. Both are very important to us because they reflect our core values and our commitment to the communities we serve. And our third goal is to optimize our internal fleet resources. So as part of our distribution strategy, we maintain an internal fleet of vehicles of all types, from courier vans to 18-wheelers, tractor trailers. So to optimize the value of our fleet, we're exploring commercial opportunities to make our fleet available to others, such as OptiFreight, to help supplement their existing transportation resources. We believe centralizing our transportation spend will help us see things that we just can't see today. And we know that visibility is key to making better decisions. Accurate and validated data is essential to giving us that visibility, and it's pivotal for helping us move our transportation strategy forward. We expect to have significant savings of time and energy on our transportation efforts, such as reducing the number of outsourced couriers we have today from several to just one partner. So we're a forward-thinking healthcare system, and we're confident that centralizing transportation spend is the key to achieving our freight management goals.
Hey, India, thanks. And Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System story is, I think, really proof positive that the freight management approach is working in the real world. So let me tell you a little bit more about OptiFreight Logistics and how it helps systems like FMOL succeed. How does OptiFreight work to get you more? And I want to dissect kind of the overview and then talk about a couple of specific areas before we get to some questions at the end. Much of the work is done behind the scenes, and you really don't see it. Things like auditing, billing application, driving supplier compliance, those are elements that really make a seamless, centralized transportation system and program work. So our teams work tirelessly to provide continuous full-service support that helps you ensure you maximize savings. We accomplish this through more people, more scale, more insights, and audited data. We have more than 250 experts working to deliver superior service and drive incremental savings. And as I mentioned earlier, our overall scale is represented by greater than 19 million shipments, and we manage that on behalf of well over 2,000 customers. And those customers span the continuum of care, so we have access to more data for a lot of purposes than really anyone else in the industry. It all adds up to advanced solutions for growing health systems today. So let me take a minute and just talk about advanced solutions and what the concept of that is and how it can help in managing the complexity of consolidation. So first, you'll gain a centralized view of your transportation spend. Again, we've talked about that visibility as being critical, and it will allow for the maximization of this, again, often neglected savings opportunity area. You can see all of your deliveries, including those coming in, those going out, the large freight, as well as the same day and courier shipments. So once you start navigating that entire transportation spend, you'll gain benefits from data-minded, highly integral transaction audits, predictive reporting, dedicated resources like a program manager. Think of this as your execution owner for your transportation strategy. on-site account management, certainly other transportation center of excellence type management experts, and ultimately more efficient use of your time and resources. So OptiFreight has the people, insights, and scale to create efficiencies that don't necessarily even exist today. And certainly this is something that we are ready to help. As we talked at the beginning of this conversation, the complexity continues to grow in healthcare through mergers and acquisitions. So let me talk, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times throughout this discussion, but let me talk a little bit further about a specific area in that of courier services, and we call that same-day solutions. So courier services arguably are the most complex transportation challenge that health systems have. I mentioned earlier that, again, individuals vary, but on average, $1 spent for parcel freights, the carriers like FedEx, many large health systems are spending about the same amount on that courier or freight moving around within their system. So, a well-designed system can become very quickly littered with new couriers that create duplication and waste. Many of those activities aren't being captured into any kind of central repository or system, so there's no real way to manage them. And typically, courier services, as I mentioned, they're one of the highest average cost per shipment areas, which makes, compliance and optimization all that more important. So OptiFreight same-day solutions works to solve those issues. Typically, we do that through visibility to your contract and transportation data, and then we build and implement a strategy to help you gain several of the following opportunities. So better data fed insights into transportation costs. Again, the idea of being able to see everything in one place with real audited and integral data, better visibility to spend and routes. Specifically, again, think of all of the movement that occurs in all the sites in IDNs. There are multiple routes that occur, and again, this allows the sequencing and the view of all of those. Certainly greater efficiency in services and the processes that relate to those services, and then ultimately reduce costs through scale and optimization. And then again, all this is backed up from folks that do this every day and have seen it in a multitude of settings. So this is how we can bring an attention and make even urgent deliveries seem more routinely cost effective. So we're here to help. So as we close this portion of the discussion out, I want to say thanks for your attention today. Certainly thanks to India for joining us and sharing the story at FMOL. And please take a minute to complete the survey that I think you have. And I know we've got some time, Mackenzie, I think, for some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Brad and India, for that fantastic presentation. We'll now begin today's question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. So it looks like the first question is from an audience member who asked, I thought if I was working with a freight manager like OptiFreight, they were managing all of my freight today.
Good question, and I think it's a misconception. This is where the visibility piece that we've talked about truly comes into play. So when you look at freight management, you might think that we're managing all of your freight spend, when in reality, about a third to half of the total transportation spend is managed. So I'll go back to the example I gave before of the parcel freights with the carriers like FedEx. Again, think about $1 spent there. There's usually $1 spent on that same day part of the enterprise, the courier piece as well. So, really the question, that question is why we're looking at this and talking about this today, of how do I pull all of those elements of the total transportation spend together? Good question.
Great, thank you so much for that response. So the next question is, an audience member wants to know what happens when it is specific to the OR or lab when they're stating that they used other methods because of emergency reasons or timing.
Yeah, and again, I think this is the advantage to tailoring a solution to individual and specific needs. So it's a great call out that whether it's the laboratory, the operating room, the pharmacy, all of those have different kind of clinical operational needs. And so with advanced solutions and with same-day solutions, you've got an opportunity with kind of the executor and that extension of your staff there on site to consult with those different departments to understand their needs, assess them, but certainly to understand first and foremost what are the service requirements that are needed? Because again, in all of those clinical department areas, there's a variety of different needs, and many times they're competing against a standard system. So what I would say is the opportunity to take a centralized approach, but to tailor it and to customize it, but do so in context with what's happening in other parts of the system. There's many times synergies that can be gained. So happy to talk further independently about that and how we can attack those individual opportunities. But again, where there is visibility, there is control, and where there's control, there can be cost savings and efficiency opportunities.
Absolutely. Thanks for that explanation, Brad. Another audience member wants to know, do vendors have a choice to use OptiFreight or not? And how do we encourage or require them to use OptiFreight?
Yeah, great question. Start with the concept of compliance. So this is, and we'll speak about this in terms of inbound freight into the hospital. So compliance, really how many vendors will utilize the program or will use the third party is really key to driving the overall value. It really, in just about every case, trumps a great price or a great rate on that transportation, because if you can't utilize more freight passing across that rate, it doesn't really add up to any savings or value. So many times we work certainly very collaboratively with each customer to identify those suppliers where there are greater compliance opportunities. We use automation and connection to the suppliers on the backside to make it easier for them to continue to keep up with the changing landscape that many health systems experience, where they're moving addresses or offices. So it's a constant continuous loop that we communicate with vendors. Certainly many of the group purchasing organizations that are involved in healthcare help to require with contracting practices for suppliers to use freight managers that customers select. And we're starting to get into new areas and arenas, like helping customers better understand the contracts that they have, and specifically the freight terms within. So there's many cases where a hospital may be able to take advantage of terms that they weren't aware that they had, based on changing some minor elements in their shipping practices. So we look at really all of those areas, but rest assured, and those that have been around this area for a while understand that compliance is really the key driver of value. And again, that compliance and increasing that really does start with the concept of getting visibility and control.
Great, that's helpful for our audience to know. The next question is, does OptiFreight manage internal courier resources?
Yes. So let me dissect that answer a little bit. So OptiFreight same-day solutions can really assess and manage all types of existing courier scenarios, whether they are insourced, outsourced, or really what's most common is a hybrid model where you've got a mix of both internal and external couriers. There are thousands, I believe it exceeds 10,000 licensed medical couriers in the domestic U.S. And so it's not uncommon to see complex systems have, well more than 10 to 20 or 30 couriers involved in different elements of their program. And in many of those cases, they've also got some insourced fleet as well. So it really depends on your needs, your priorities. We can help tailor and implement a solution that'll help managing both, manage internal and external courier resources, or create a new solution or model that's performed by a courier where you give us your requirements and we go select a courier based on those requirements. Great question.
Great, thank you so much for that response. Another audience member said, comprehensive freight management sounds great, but how do I know where to start?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in the last half hour. We have a consultant team that really is heavily focused on the process of assessments. So determining where to start really starts with an assessment. What do you do today across your entire transportation spend and operations? So these experts who have been in transportation for quite a while, they come in and collaborate with your organization. We talked about some of the departments. Think about laboratory, pharmacy, home health, AP, IT, treasury, supply chain. Again, depends on the size and complexity of your organization, but multiple departments. What the consultants will do is come in and document and map the current state, and then based on those findings, they'll build recommendations on basically areas to drive efficiency and create a roadmap of phases to start the journey towards full visibility, better control and confidence, and then ultimately a sustainable process.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that, Brad. The next question is, can you share an example of how gaining visibility across small, parcel, and courier helps to drive efficiency?
Yep, another great question. So we talked about all of these different type of transportation needs and actualities overlapping. So again, if you stood on the dock of a hospital and for a day or for an hour and just watched the number of different vehicles and types that pull up and leave there, it's very easy to see how this gets complex. So what about the world where the carriers like FedEx or UPS, where they interface with a courier or a localized delivery service? So, think about all the different elements you've got involved there. You've got rates, you've got service options, you've got, certainly the end user needs and compliance to those. So, we've found, I think, through our journey that a lot of healthcare organizations will focus on optimizing each of those modes separately. But when you do that, you miss out on the opportunity to leverage the strengths of each of those modes collectively. So, after careful review of data and discussions with appropriate departments, there's oftentimes opportunities to transfer a portion of small parcel shipments, which might go on a carrier like FedEx, over to existing regularly scheduled routes that your local courier may manage. And conversely, transferring some of that same day ad hoc courier to an overnight structure that a FedEx might carry might make sense. So it really comes back to looking at the comprehensive view and then understanding how can you manage what makes the most sense for your goals and objectives. But looking at those two independently is a pretty common practice, and it's also a common missed opportunity. Really looking at them together and collectively allows you to make some, I think, some pretty substantial and forward-moving decisions that ultimately will save money and candidly will improve performance and the satisfaction of the customers on the other end.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those examples, Brad. We have another audience member who's asking about OptiFreight reports, and she says, can OptiFreight reports be run from a client portal, or does OptiFreight provide these?
The answer is both. We have a portal that allows customers 24/7 to access updated information. We also utilize our experts and resources to push information to you, to interpret that information, et cetera. So really the full gamut of access to information is there. It really is back to tailored to the strategy of what the customer needs specifically.
Awesome. And it looks like we have time for one more question. This audience member wants to know, does OptiFreight have their own courier?
Short answer is no. So we are a non-asset-based transportation broker, which means we don't own the couriers, we don't employ the drivers, we don't use our own fleets, but we do work with several couriers across the region. I mentioned a minute ago, there are literally thousands of medically licensed couriers in the United States. So, this variety allows us to look at, a courier that meets the needs of the individual customer and the individual region and what their scenario sets up as, and ultimately delivers the most value. So the thing to take away from this is ultimately we are courier agnostic. We're going to use the right courier for the right need as identified with each customer.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank Brad and India for their excellent presentation and to our audience for participating today. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.